I must offer a word of caution about today's sermon. It is not gentle. It will not go quietly into the good night. It contains pieces of remarks I gave in Atlantic City this week in response to the Pittsburgh shooting, and these remarks caused the assembled polite politicians arrayed behind me to scramble for the exits as I spoke. It was a moment of pride. This is a sermon of fire and passion, of hard truths that may well make you uncomfortable. Church is a place to find comfort, yes, and I hope that all people find comfort here. But I will warn you that not all ideas will find comfort here. Not all policies will be welcomed because they are not in accordance with our stated values of empowering the vulnerable. Not all thoughts or words will be at ease here, where we value science and integrity and democracy instead of division, dishonesty, fear, hate, and autocratic rule. Buckle up, Buttercup. It's election time. Last night, we set our clocks back an hour and gained a little sleep, in theory. I never remember if this is the beginning or end of daylight savings time. I only know that we fall back in the fall and spring forward in March, or maybe April. Citizens will go to the polls on Tuesday. Will we fall back into the 1950s or 1890s? Or will we spring forward into an age where healthcare is a human right, global warming is a thing, and the world is inarguably round? The questions before us are stark. Politics in the United States is polarized like never before, and this means that the middle path, as sought by the Buddha, is elusive at best, and at this time, dangerous to our neighbors who live on society's margins. We are past the time for compromise. There is no room for moderation. We have come to the place where we must understand that speaking reasonably and politely no longer works. Appealing to people's sense of humanity no longer works. Shame no longer works. Empathy is absent. There is no compassion for the vulnerable. There is only fascism and resistance. Politics in the United States has been reduced to its very basest form, and it is far less dignified than the reductionism and distillation sought by Thoreau in his retreat to the woods. Our political landscape now consists of the party that wants to provide health care and the one who puts children in cages. That is the stark choice before us. The United States citizens head to the polls this week, again faced with the enormous task of selecting governmental leaders. Who will make decisions about school discrimination policies? Who will set the mill rate on property tax in my town? Who will advise and consent on the next Supreme Court justice nomination? When I say we are in dire times, I wish I were being hyperbolic. It is time for the United States to stop pretending that our differences are a matter of polite disagreements on philosophical matters. We are beyond that. Last week, the president suggested that if the Jewish worshipers attending services in Pittsburgh had been better prepared, they might not have been killed. He said much the same when students were killed in Parkland, Florida last year. He then claimed that they were a tool of liberals when they had the audacity to demand that they stop being shot in their classrooms. He never spoke about the shooter in Pittsburgh, who was radicalized and incited in his attack by the rhetoric expressed by the president as a standard stump speech in his countless rallies around the country. Absent that entire discussion is the acknowledgement of the root of the problem, and that is an ideology of hate. Haters are emboldened. They are empowered now with a champion in the White House. Men are sexually assaulting women on airplanes and saying it's okay because the president does it. The Ku Klux Klan says recruitment of new members has more than tripled in the last 2 years since their hero was elected president. Nazis are unashamed to wear their colors in public, even visible on the arms of on-duty police officers wearing short-sleeved uniforms. But the president isn't a Nazi, people say. He's not a Klansman. I say to that what Tallahassee mayor and Democratic candidate for Florida Governor Andrew Gillum said of his opponent, former Congressman Ron DeSantis. Now, I'm not calling Mr. DeSantis a racist. I'm simply saying the racists believe he's a racist. And the racists are delighted to have their man in the White House. I don't need him to don a pointy white hood to know he's a racist. I can tell by the company he keeps. Last weekend, 11 people were murdered by a white man who wanted to kill all Jews. He was arrested alive after shooting 2 police officers as well. 2 African-American grandparents were shot down in a Kroger's supermarket on a late October Friday by a white man who told police when he was taken into custody, also alive, that white people don't shoot white people, and they had nothing to fear from him. Less than 2 weeks ago, a white man who is an ardent supporter and fan of the president is alleged to have sent poorly constructed pipe bombs to a dozen national leaders who oppose the president's policies. He, remarkably, was taken into custody alive as well. Friday night of this week, 3 people, including the gunman, were shot and killed in Tallahassee when the gunman opened fire at a yoga studio. 5 others were injured. The shooter had a social media profile filled with misogynist material and was said to identify himself as an incel, or a man who was involuntarily celibate. He blamed women's refusal to have sex with him for his rage and the downfall of society. He had been charged with sexual assault on 2 previous occasions. Now, some will say that ideas cannot be legislated, and that is an offense to American sensibilities of freedom and democracy to limit what people can say and do. And yet, as a former journalist, I can tell you that there are limits to free speech. We cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. We cannot libel or slander, and we cannot use language that will incite violence. What we can do, but so far have lacked the will to do, is to hold those in power accountable to those same rules. When a candidate and then a president leads followers in chants of lock her up, when he encourages his followers to attack the press, to brutalize peaceful protesters, and urges police to rough up suspects during arrest, that language is very explicitly inciting violence. Now, if that language came from me or you, it might be considered so much nonsense from someone who plainly lacks an understanding of democratic principles, the United States Constitution, and some basic civil liberties. But once that language comes from a candidate for national office, as during the election, and now from the President of the United States, those words hold power and authority. And we are seeing the result of that ideology of hate. And I will tell you that violent words always precede violent action. Hate speech always becomes before hate crimes. And silence in the face of hate is acquiescence. Failure to oppose hate speech is perceived as an endorsement. When the president says that the free press is the enemy of the people and the press need to shout that the free press is only the enemy of tyrants, despots, and cowards. When the president says fake news the people need to shout back, "Fake election." I have created a file folder on my computer titled Pastoral Responses to Shootings. Charlottesville, Las Vegas, The Pulse, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Tree of Life Synagogue, Kroger's, Texas First Baptist Church, Fort Lauderdale, Mother Emanuel, Plano, Texas, Santa Fe High School, San Bernardino, Sandy Hook, Ferguson, Gabby Giffords, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant. There are too many to name, and they don't stop. And what they have in common is hate. Hate driven by white nationalism. The president said last week, "I am a nationalist." That is not a dog whistle. That is no longer a silent noise heard only by a select few. That is a public declaration of affiliation with fascism. That is hate driven by an utter disregard for the value of human life, particularly human lives that are marginalized, lives that are black or brown or immigrant or Jewish or queer or perhaps liberal in some way, lives that are something other than those conforming to the model of white, cisgender, heteronormative Christian patriarchy. And I need to be clear about something that gets missed. This is not about mental illness. This is not about the loner, isolated, acting on his own. And we need to stop pretending that mental illness is the cause of this and stop maligning people who live with mental illness. This is not about a disability. This is about hate. This is about ideologies of hate. This is about the willful disregard for human life. It is about the utter lack of compassion and empathy for those who are vulnerable. This is about the glorification of cruelty and the eroticization of bullying. In this environment, that's why I say moderation is no longer possible. Where is the middle ground on school shootings? How many is too many? How many worshipers must die before we agree that gun control is necessary? How many dead children does it take for us to act? We have come to a place in these United States where after a student shot and killed a classmate at 7 a.m. at Butler High School in Matthews, North Carolina on Monday morning, the school went into lockdown at 7. Lockdown was over at 9:30 and classes were back in session by lunch. There was only one kid that died. This is who we are. This is what we have become as a nation. But this is not who we are capable of being. It is who we are at the moment, but we can be so much more. Now, I'm sure there are some very fine people. No, I'm not. There are no very fine people among the Nazis. I can affirm, as a Unitarian Universalist minister, that every Nazi in the U.S. has inherent worth as a human being, but I draw the line at their behavior and their positions. Remember I said originally, everyone is welcome here. Behavior is something else. Ideology is something else. I have no interest in sitting down with a Nazi or a fascist for coffee to find out what we might have in common. I am not obligated to break bread with somebody who wants me killed. and neither are you. We progressives or liberals or whatever we fancy ourselves to be must come to the understanding that our being nice to our enemies has not worked. Okay? What it has done is shown bullies that there are no significant, painful consequences for their actions. In our efforts to be understanding, open-minded, and compassionate, what we have been is wishy-washy, cowardly, and complicit. We can hold people accountable and still value them as humans. In fact, if we value them as humans, we must hold them accountable. There were people who sought some kind of middle ground compromise when it came to the abolition of slavery and the emancipation of black people. There were also people who urged gradual, incremental change towards women's suffrage and towards civil rights for black people. They were not called great negotiators. They were not called reasonable moderates. They were called moral cowards. The time for centrism is over. To compromise now means to pick a number of kids that can be kept in cages, or high school kids that it is okay to lose to gun violence in a year, or pick a number of people that it is acceptable to let die without access to affordable quality health care. Who will pick those numbers? I won't. The only number that is acceptable as an answer to those questions is 0. 0 kids in cages, 0 kids shot in class, 0 people who die because they lack money for insulin, 0 people homeless, 0 people addicted to opioids, 0 people executed at the hands of the state. There is a saying that people get the kind of government they deserve. In light of our current situation, that seems a mite harsh. But there is truth to those words. When we care enough to fight back, and I mean really fight back, not just argue politely, when we are mad enough to do that, we will get a government that is responsive to the needs of its people. When we stop tolerating corruption and hold our elected leaders accountable for their actions, we will get a government that reflects our values. When we get involved and demand transparency and accountability, we will get a government that is honest and works on behalf of the people it is designed to serve. When we demand that our government act with compassion and justice, we will meet a caravan of refugees with blankets and food instead of tanks and troops. We are capable of so much more. We have 1 week to make our voices heard at the polls so that we get the kind of government we deserve. May we move forward instead of back this week. May we live into our highest ideals, move forward to our potential, and not fall back like our clocks, which need to be reset again and again. Our poet today told us we can make a house called tomorrow. What we bring finally to the new day every day is ourselves, and that's all we need. That's all we need to start. It's everything we require to keep going. Look back only for as long as you must, then go forward into the history you will make. Be good, then better. Write books, cure disease, make us proud, make yourself proud. And those who came before you, when you hear thunder, hear it as their applause. Let's make ourselves proud. Let us hear the applause of our ancestors. May it be so. Amen.